The last humans to leave Earth's orbit did it in 1972, and for 54 years, every plan to send someone back either died on a spreadsheet, got strangled by politics, or quietly disappeared into a filing cabinet. The dream didn't. That's the part nobody explains. Not the launches, not the astronauts, not the hardware specs. Those are easy to document. What's genuinely hard to explain is why the idea, the specific, stubborn, expensive idea that human beings belong beyond low Earth orbit, survived every administration that tried to bury it, every review board that declared it unsustainable, every budget cycle that starved it down to almost nothing. The hardware got canceled, the funding got pulled, the engineers got reassigned, and yet here we are, April 2026, watching 4 people accelerate away from Earth toward the moon for the first time since the year bell-bottoms were in fashion. The question isn't how they got there. The question is why this idea refused to die long enough for them to try.
Because it almost didn't make it. Multiple times. And each time it almost died, it was the same thing that killed it. Not physics, not engineering, not the terrifying emptiness of the void between worlds. It was political will running out before the rockets could be finished. That is the one threat that every generation of moon dreamers faced in equal measure. The hardware survived, the funding nearly didn't. Understanding that is the only way to understand why April 1st, 2026 felt less like a triumph and more like a relief. Start with July 20th, 1969. You know the story. Everyone knows it. 12 human beings across 6 missions walk on another world. They drive a small car across its surface. They hit golf balls. They bring home rocks that scientists are still studying today, more than half a century later. And while the astronauts are doing all of this, the people back at NASA headquarters aren't just watching, they're planning. The internal documents from that period read like the work of people who genuinely believe they've cracked the problem. There are sketches for permanent lunar bases. There are timelines for Mars. The moon is not being treated as a destination. It's being treated as a prototype, the first proof that human beings can leave Earth and survive somewhere else. Everything after is just logistics.
12 men walk on the moon. 3 missions get canceled while they're still in planning. The budget line doesn't lie. The political machinery that built Apollo was never fundamentally about the moon. It was about a race, about making sure the Soviet Union didn't get there first, about demonstrating to every country watching on a black and white television screen that the American system could do something the Soviet system couldn't. The moment Neil Armstrong stepped off the lander's footpad onto the surface on July 20th, 1969, that moment, the race was over. Not officially, not in any declared statement, but the pressure that it made Congress willing to spend what would today be roughly $280 billion, enough to build a dozen international space stations, that pressure evaporated in the seconds it took for that first footstep to be broadcast around the world. 3 more planned Apollo missions, Apollo 18, 19, and 20, were cut. The last humans who ever stood on the moon lifted off from the lunar surface on December 14, 1972. Gene Cernan, the last man to stand there, said as he climbed the ladder, "We leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return." He thought he was stating a delay, not writing an epitaph.
The generation of engineers who built Apollo kept their blueprints. They moved their notes into filing cabinets. They answered the question, when do we go back, less and less often, because the honest answer kept getting harder to say out loud. Not yet. Not now. Not with this administration. Not with this budget. Not with this war, this recession, this other crisis that matters more to someone who has never looked up at the moon and felt the pull of it. That political logic, "We won the race, so why keep paying for the track," is not an aberration in the story you're about to hear. It is the story. Every single near-death experience this program ever had traces directly back to the same moment. The moment the race ended, and the justification ended with it. That's not cynicism. It's just what happened. The hardware survived 1972. The political will nearly didn't. And for the next 3 decades, the moon sat there, unchanged, waiting. For 32 years, no human being traveled farther from Earth than about 250 miles, the altitude of the International Space Station, which is close enough that you could, in principle, see it from the right hilltop with the naked eye on a clear night. That's how far humanity's ambition shrank between 1972 and 2003. Not to the stars, not to Mars, not even back to the moon. 250 miles. The distance from London to Manchester, from New York City to Boston. That's the frontier for 32 years. And then, February 1st, 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia breaks apart over Texas while re-entering the atmosphere, and 16 days of debris scatter across 3 states. 7 crew members are killed. And the review board that investigates the accident does something unexpected. It doesn't just look at the foam insulation that broke off during launch and punched a hole in the wing. It looks at the whole program. It looks at a space agency that has been flying the same vehicles for 20 years, to the same altitude for the same kinds of missions, without a clear answer to the question of what it's all building toward. The board's final report contains a phrase that haunts every space policy discussion that follows. NASA had become organizationally silent on the question of where it was going. President George Bush announces the Vision for Space Exploration in January 2004, 14 months after Columbia. Retire the shuttle by 2010, build new rockets, return humans to the moon by 2020, go to Mars after that. For the first time in 30 years, there is a plan with a real name, a real budget request, and a real date written on a real piece of paper. The plan is called Constellation. The new crew capsule is called Orion. The new rockets are called Ares 1 and Ares 5, named deliberately after the god of war, as if they needed to signal that this program meant business. Engineers who had spent 30 years keeping the blueprints start pulling them back out of the filing cabinets. For a few years, it genuinely feels like something is happening. Pause on this for a moment, because you need to make a decision. It's February 2010. You're sitting in a meeting with the Obama administration's budget team. The Augustine Commission, a group of independent experts hired to evaluate Constellation, has just handed you its findings. The program is behind schedule by years, it is over budget by billions. To actually reach the moon by 2020, it would need $3 billion more per year than Congress has approved. $3 billion extra per year. That's roughly the annual budget of a mid-sized American city's entire government, every year, indefinitely, just to keep the program on its original timeline. And even then, the Commission says, the math is tight. You have 2 options. Cancel Constellation completely, walk away from the overruns, free the money for other things, bet on commercial rockets to eventually fill the gap, or fund it fully, absorb the cost increases, accept the delays, trust that Congress won't reverse course when the next administration arrives. If you cancel, the moon almost certainly waits another generation. If you fund it, you may spend 2 decades and end up exactly where you are now, except poorer. You have to choose. What do? The Obama administration canceled Constellation in February 2010. The rockets died. But here's the thing the headlines consistently missed, the detail that changes everything about the next 15 years. Orion, the actual capsule, the piece of hardware that carries human beings, survived. Not as a full program, not with its original budget, but the engineers who had been building it kept building it inside a restructured program with reduced funding, because someone in that room made the decision that even if you're not sure where you're going, you should probably keep building the thing that humans sit inside. The program they killed in 2010 was the program that built the lifeboat 4 people trusted with their lives on April 1, 2026. The decision to cancel saved money. The decision to preserve Orion saved the mission. Both things are true at the same time. September 14th, 2011. NASA announces the Space Launch System, SLS. The name is deliberate in its blandness. No god of war, no constellation of stars, just Space Launch System. A rocket built from existing shuttle components, designed by much of the same workforce that had built the Ares rockets, funded by a Congress that had killed Constellation but was now, apparently, unwilling to let the human spaceflight program collapse entirely. The stated goal? Return humans to the moon, then aim for Mars. For the first time since 1972, the United States government has a rocket program whose official, documented, publicly stated purpose is to send people somewhere beyond low Earth orbit. By 2017, the Government Accountability Office, the independent agency that tracks how the federal government spends money, has issued multiple reports on SLS. The pattern is consistent. Costs are rising. Schedules are slipping. The rocket that was supposed to fly by 2017 is not going to fly by 2017. Every year of delay costs roughly $2 billion, which means that by the time SLS finally launches in 2022, the delay alone has cost more than the entire Apollo 11 mission in today's money. Critics start calling it the Senate launch system, because the cynical explanation for why it exists at all isn't engineering necessity. It's that the congressional districts that contain the factories making the rocket components have powerful senators who aren't going to let those factories close. The dream is staying alive not because it's efficient, but because it's impossible to kill without destroying too many political relationships at once. This is the uncomfortable truth at the center of the whole story. The same inertia that made the program slow, overpriced, and frustrating also made it bulletproof. Every administration that wanted to cut it ran into the same wall, a wall made not of steel or concrete, but of congressional allies, manufacturing contracts, and aerospace jobs spread strategically across enough states to make cancellation politically suicidal. Critics are right that this is a terrible way to design a space program. They're also right that without it, there is no rocket. Both things can be true. The hardware survived by becoming impossible to kill. That is not a compliment. It's just what happened. The engineers who started working on SLS in 2011, young engineers in their early 30s who had grown up watching shuttle launches and got into aerospace because of what they saw, are now in their 40s. Some of them have children who are old enough to have watched the Artemis 2 launch on April 1st, 2026. They didn't build this rocket quickly. They didn't build it cheaply. But they kept building it through 3 presidential administrations, through multiple cancellation threats, through years of criticism from people who weren't right about the costs, but somehow assumed the alternative was something better. The moon didn't get a better rocket. It got the rocket that couldn't be killed. And in April 2026, that was enough. Here's the question the critics never fully answered. If you had canceled SLS in 2015, when the cost overruns were undeniable and the schedule slippage was obvious, what would the Artemis 2 crew have flown? SpaceX's Starship, the rocket that was supposed to replace SLS, conducted its first flight tests in 2023 and is still not human-rated for lunar missions in 2026. No commercial rocket in existence in 2015 had the capability to send a crew capsule on a lunar trajectory. The choice was never between an efficient rocket and an expensive one. The choice was between an expensive rocket and no rocket at all. Knowing that now, would you have kept SLS alive in 2015? Take a moment with that before moving on. November 16th, 2022. Pad 39B at Kennedy Space Center, Florida. The same pad that launched Apollo 10 and Apollo 17,
the last crewed mission to the moon in 1972. The Space Launch System stands there in the dark, illuminated by searchlights, and it is genuinely enormous. Taller than the Statue of Liberty, heavier at liftoff than a dozen fully loaded commercial aircraft, the most powerful rocket NASA has ever built. There are no humans aboard. There's a crew capsule, Orion, and inside it are 3 mannequins. Not metaphorical placeholders, not models. Actual instrumented mannequins, wired with hundreds of sensors to measure what a human body would experience. The vibration during launch, the radiation environment during the lunar flyby, the forces during re-entry. Because before you put real people in something, you send mannequins to find out what the mannequins discover. The engineers in the control room, many of whom have worked on this specific rocket for more than a decade, are watching the countdown, and for the first time in their professional lives, about to find out if the thing they built actually works. The launch attempt in August 2022 scrubs. A hydrogen fuel sensor shows a reading outside the expected range, which means the ground system detects that something might not be right with the flow of fuel into the engine, and the computers stop the countdown automatically. Engineers spend 2 weeks checking every component. The second attempt, weeks later, scrubs for weather. A third attempt is cut short. When the rocket finally lifts off in November, the sound alone, a deep physical force that people miles away describe as feeling it in their chest, not hearing it, announces that something different is happening, something that hasn't happened from this pad in 50 years. 25 days later, Orion splashes down in the Pacific Ocean, heat shield intact, systems functioning. The capsule has flown around the moon on what engineers call a free return trajectory, meaning a path that if everything fails, the gravity of the moon and the Earth will guide you back home without requiring a single engine burn. It's the same approach Apollo used as a safety measure. It worked then, it works now. The political argument for a crewed mission becomes, overnight, much harder to oppose. A successful unmanned test means that refusing to put humans on the next flight starts to look not like caution, but like a choice to waste what was already built. The dream has passed its most dangerous test. It has actually worked. But here's what the post-mission reports reveal that never quite makes the headlines. The heat shield on Orion showed unexpected wear. Not catastrophic wear, not the kind that would have killed anyone. But in sections of the shield, the material had eroded slightly differently than the computer models predicted, which means the computer models were wrong about something. And sending humans on the next mission with computer models that are wrong about something is not something any engineer with their name on the safety review will sign off on. The answer is simple. Figure out why the models were wrong. Redesign the affected sections, retest everything. The consequence is equally simple. Artemis 2, which had been targeting 2024, slips to 2025, then to 2026. A year and a half of delay because the mannequins found something real. The 4 people who sat inside Orion on April 1st, 2026, owe their lives in the most direct and literal sense to what a plastic mannequin experienced on a test flight 3.5 years earlier. April 1st, 2026, 6:35 in the evening, Eastern Time. Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen are in their seats inside Orion, a capsule named Integrity, which, given everything this program has been through, feels either perfectly chosen or deeply ironic, depending on your mood. The Space Launch System ignites beneath them. 8.5 million pounds of force, roughly the same as 50 commercial jet engines running simultaneously at full thrust, begins pushing the stack away from Earth. Inside the capsule, the pressure builds. 3 times the weight of normal gravity presses down on the crew's chests, making each breath a small act of effort. Their heart rates are elevated. The noise is beyond noise. It's felt in the bones, in the teeth, in the place behind the eyes. The Cape Canaveral coast, with its palmetto scrub and its launch spectators who drove from 3 states away to watch this, disappears beneath them. For the first time since December 14, 1972, 53 years, 3 months, and 18 days, human beings are leaving low Earth orbit, not visiting the International Space Station, not conducting a spacewalk 200 miles up, leaving, going somewhere. The moon, which is roughly 240,000 miles away, far enough that if you drove there at highway speed without stopping, it would take 6 months, begins to grow incrementally larger in the windows. The mission is not a landing. This is important to say clearly because in the relief of the moment, it's easy to misread what's happening. Artemis 2 is a 10-day crewed test flight. The crew will loop around the moon, swinging out to a distance of about 5,000 miles beyond the far side, farther from Earth than any human being has ever traveled, and come home. They will not land. The actual landing, Artemis 3, is still years away, still dependent on a lunar lander built by a company that has never landed humans anywhere, still vulnerable to budget pressures from an administration that has already proposed significant reductions to NASA's overall funding. 54 years of program history are sitting inside that capsule, and the next chapter is still unwritten. Now, stop, right here, before you hear what comes next. Artemis 2 launched 5 days ago. The crew is in lunar space as this script is being written. The moon landing, Artemis 3, still depends on hardware that isn't finished, a budget that isn't secured, and a political consensus that has historically dissolved every 8 years or so. You have just heard this idea nearly die 5 separate times across 54 years. You have heard it survive each time through a combination of engineering stubbornness, congressional self-interest, and the inability of any administration to fully kill something that too many people needed to believe in. Here is the question. Do you believe the humans land on the moon before 2035? Not what NASA says. Not what the schedule shows. What do you actually believe based on everything you've just heard? Hold that answer. The idea that survived all of this, the specific idea that human beings should leave Earth's orbit and go somewhere, survived not because it was inevitable. Nothing about this was inevitable. 30 years in a filing cabinet, Constellation canceled, SLS over-budgeted and years late. Artemis delayed by a plastic mannequin's heat shield data. The idea survived because every generation that canceled the specific program still couldn't bring itself to cancel the underlying need. The need to go further. The need to not be finished. The engineers who started in their 30s are watching in their 40s. The politicians who canceled the rockets watched the launches from the same television screens that used to watch the Apollo footage their parents saved on VHS. The dream kept getting the program killed and then keeping it alive again through sheer accumulated human insistence. 54 years, 4 human beings, 1 Orion capsule called integrity. Not inevitable, just stubbornly, expensively, repeatedly unwilling to stop. Here is where the story stands today, and it's important to say this carefully. The idea of returning humans to the moon did not survive 54 years because it was strong. It survived because the people who needed it to survive were always somehow still in the room when the decisions were made. The idea spine of this whole arc, the reason every cancellation produced a resurrection, is that each generation that shut down the program still needed to believe humanity wasn't finished. That need was always stronger than the budget cuts, stronger than the review boards, stronger than the political calculus. Not by much, sometimes barely, but enough. What is still unresolved is not the destination. The destination is the same as it's always been. What's unresolved is the same thing that's been unresolved since December 14, 1972, the political will to finish. The Artemis 3 lunar lander still doesn't have a confirmed launch date as of the release of this video. The NASA budget that funds the whole program is under review by an administration with different priorities. The pattern that has repeated 5 times in 54 years, program funded, program delayed, program threatened, program barely saved, is not obviously broken. The hardware survived again. Whether the funding survives is the question that has no answer yet. You are watching this in real time. The crew of Artemis 2 are in lunar space right now. Not metaphorically, not historically, literally right now as you watch this video. They are the first human beings to go this far from Earth since before most people watching this were born. The engineers who kept this alive through 3 decades and 5 near cancellations are watching too. Probably on their phones, probably from parking lots and break rooms and living rooms, the way most people watch history happen. Bridge C applies to you directly. The people who made the decisions that nearly ended this are gone from their offices. The consequences of those decisions and the consequences of the decisions still being made right now about Artemis 3 are still here. You are living inside them. So the question this video cannot answer, and neither can you and neither can anyone watching the tracking screens right now, is this. Does the generation that finally lands on the lunar surface do it because the dream was strong enough to survive one more time? Or does it do it because the program finally ran out of excuses to stop and the political machine, for once, couldn't find a way to kill it before the boots touched down? History says both answers have been true before. History does not say which one applies this time.